Great, thank you. So Devin's recording, just so everyone knows. I'll call the meeting to order for the Planning Advisory Committee meeting of June 12th, 2025. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Wendy. And all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, that is carried. And approval of the minutes for Planning Advisory Committee meeting for May 15th, 2025. Motion to approve. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Seconder? Second. Thanks, Bev. Are there any errors or omissions? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, that too is carried. Thank you. Do we have anyone for public input? Yes, go ahead. If you just, yeah, Devin will just help you out there, Dr. Lake. Yes. You could just state your name and where you live. That would be great.
Don Gadden, 14 Chestnut in town.
Yes.
I'm also a member of the advisory committee on the Housing Accelerator Fund. And I just want to say and commend the staff for a very collaborative approach. The report before you raises a lot of important issues. And I think on behalf of the committee, we're looking forward to some results from this work and wish you well on your deliberations today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Son. Appreciate it. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes and no. Wonderful. New business. Introduction to the HAF Housing Accelerator Fund Action Plan Implementation Framework, Package 2. Director Lake, are you going to walk us through?
I'm just going to do it. So the way we're going to do this today is I'm going to do just a very brief few words. Tristan's going to take you through the What We Heard report, and then Lindsay's going to walk you through the non-market housing work.
Okay,
so
wonderful.
I'll try to be fast.
I was going to make a comment, but I won't do it.
Okay, here we go. So I just want to keep reminding ourselves what we're doing here each time we bring you new packages, because this is going to keep going for a number of months. So I just want to ground us each time where we're at, what we're doing, and what we're trying to achieve. So just breaking down the action plan that we've committed to looking at. So these are maybe slightly different words, but I think generally this has been the language we've been using around the different actions that we're looking at. So looking at the R1 zone, looking at low density housing, allowing more than one dwelling unit there. We're doing a plan review that has a number of different actions in it. Things like building height, pieces of the downtown, different zoning issues in the neighborhood. So that's really the bulk of the work that we've been doing. That's what we consulted on. And then the other piece of the work that we've really been consulting on is the parking amendment. So that's what Tristan's going to be presenting to you. We're introducing the non-market housing work, and we're having a kickoff meeting with Acadia in a few weeks, and we'll bring that work through the PAC shortly. Probably, I'm going to say September. So I just want to underscore a couple things as staff and the work that we do, and we're bringing consultants in and working kind of in between the community and council and the committees. But what we're really looking for at this stage, I just want to be clear, because we're not giving you sort of a final report. We're looking at directions, and I just want to underscore how critical that is at this point, so we can kind of move on and get sort of the detailed work done. And so some people that I talked to at the open houses were sort of like, yeah, this seems fine, but I'd like to see the details. And I think a lot of folks in Wolfville, in my experience, are quite detailed. So we're going to be presenting information today, getting some more feedback, more discussion, outlining and making sure everyone understands what we have heard. And then we're going to be searching for some more clear direction at our July meeting. So we'll bring another package to you that is shaped in some questions and some direction to give us that sort of social capital to move ahead. The second point is I'm hoping, and I do get this sense that there's a lot of this that we have consensus on as a planning committee. I'm not sure. I'm sure there will be sticky issues. That's what we want to hear about. And so again, people want to see the details. And so we would like to move through that. It'll take us a few months to do that, to bring you actual amendments to the planning documents. Again, tonight's meeting is mostly about receiving information. So we don't necessarily need clear direction tonight. We're going to seek that at the next meeting. We just need a little more time to formulate some recommendations. And we've also had good success bringing a more discussion-based meeting to you and hitting all of the meetings each month, regardless of where we were at. So that was good feedback that the committee has given us. Again, the other points I think I've said. From the July PAC kind of broader directions, we are going to check in with council after that on those directions. I don't think we'll be looking at formal motions. We'll probably be looking at somewhat consensus direction and seeing where those tough points are that you need more information on. That's really what we're trying to seek out. This is just more at the staff level at the town. Like we obviously appreciate the support of the consultants. Some of this is more of an administrative process. So we really only have one person, I'm saying 1.5 people that administer our land use bylaw. A lot of what we're funneling towards here are changes to that land use bylaw. So when I say 1.5 people, Marcia Elliott is our development officer. She does a lot of work with our land use bylaw. I'm somewhat involved and have been very involved in the past. Mark is more involved now. But he also spends a significant amount of his time on other things. So some of this becomes, when we get down into the details a few months from now, I think we will have a perspective on this from an administrative perspective. And I think that's important to keep in mind because we are doing quite a few amendments to the land use bylaw or proposing to. Just to remind everyone sort of the legislative reality. So we have a municipal planning strategy. We are amending that document as part of this process. Okay, so the province gives us the authority through the Municipal Government Act to basically guide and regulate change in the town through that document. The policies that we have in there basically say change in the town will conform to this. If we ever go to the UARB, that's really the test. That's there and they're looking at. And there is a bit of a line here between strategy, policy, and governance between the MPS and the land use bylaw. Most of that land use bylaw and subdivision bylaw, that's administered by staff. So there is a bit of a difference there, but there's a really important process that we're going through now. So everyone understands how the municipal plan is being implemented through those other documents, through those bylaw documents. Some of you are very familiar with this. Some of you, this is very new. I think this is probably my last slide. I might have one more. So we're doing a lot of work concurrently. So these are all of the sections of the municipal planning strategy. Okay. Last week, we had some sessions with council doing strategic planning. That's very much aligned with the front section of the municipal plan. And we plan to carry some of that work forward in the fall and make some amendments. So we're aligning with where we are today. Since we adopted this plan, a lot of stuff has changed. These aren't, I would call most of these other amendments outside of the accelerator fund more like housekeeping amendments. They're not whole scale big changes to sections, but I just want to flag this, that when we are opening up the municipal plan, going through this level of process, going through a legislative process where the province is involved, we will be bringing you other amendments. So I'm just highlighting some here. We're doing some parks and open space work. We have policy guidance in this document that we'll be bringing in. We're doing active transportation, traffic. There's discussions around transit that we're doing. We'll be checking in with that section as well. And then we're updating our flood risk work as well. So that's up in the top right corner, the climate and environment. And then I've just got little notes, you know, a lot of the document is about housing, is about the built form, built environment. So those other sections will be impacted by this process. So just to say something else about direction and clarity, I just think this is really important for people to kind of be at the level that the process is at and not be too far down the road on a very specific detail that we will bring you. We will, you know, have draft documents that we can change and go through. But these are just some example questions that I have based on that action plan at the beginning. So, you know, what is the comfort level with the low density housing changes? Is it 1 unit? Is it 3? Is it more nuanced than that? That we want to get down to over the next couple meetings where we're at, what the comfort levels are. With the plan review, a lot of that work's been discussing the downtown. So those are issues like the building height. We're talking about heritage. Tristan will go into details about these things. And then we have a sort of a bigger package around the neighborhoods, and we had 3 scenarios. And we'd like to know where the comfort levels are around some of those changes that we've discussed. The last one is about parking. So we have highlighted a very specific project in the package, and we talked about a parking lot. That's a little bit more like a capital project that we would work with council on, and we would go through a budget process and we would do project delivery around that. But that's a really important discussion item when we're talking about changing parking requirements. Because the first question is, well, where are people going to park? The vehicles aren't going to go away. So just differentiating between those things, I think is important. There's regulatory roles that we're playing, and then there's more project roles that I think at the end of the day is a bit more of a council role about how that rolls out and how we deliver the projects. The last point is just like, think about these other issues. If you don't think about them today, you'll surely think about them for our next meeting. And again, we'll have lots more time. More issues are going to come up, especially once we get into the details. So just process to come. So at the July planning meeting, we will frame up some recommendations and directions for you and try to get your comfort level on those based on today's discussion and all the other work that we've been doing. Again, we'll have a check-in directly with council. In September, we're going to bring a bit more work around non-market and the Acadia work to you. And then we're hoping to have actual draft documents. So sections of the land use bylaw, municipal plan, in the fall. I'm saying October, November. We'll see how the workflow goes. And then we're steering towards consulting on those draft documents. So probably doing something extensive on that, a number of events, putting them on our website, having more discussion about them. And then we'd be steering towards what I'm calling the final changes and a legislative adoption process. So we're compelled to do certain things in the Municipal Government Act to adopt changes to our planning documents. So that will be the end of the process. So there's a public hearing, there's notification and letters and different things that we send out. And the final little graphic that I'm showing there is just that at the end of the day, all of us, myself included, are giving advice to council. This committee, some of you are on council, obviously, but this committee is a really key piece of advice for council. But, you know, these draft documents, we may take them out to our design review committee once we have the details and others to benefit council's decision. I think that's all I have. And I'll maybe answer some questions with Tristan as we get into what we heard, because they should go together.
Is there any questions first off for Devin? Can I ask go ahead, Al.
I was just going to ask, just for clarity, so there's going to be a mixture of MPS amendments going, and the expectation they'll come to PAC probably around October and November. Is that the expectation?
Yes, we want to have everything drafted in the fall. I'm being somewhat tentative on that because I don't know, once we get into the process and once we really start digging into some of these stickier issues, what will come. And so once we get further down the field, we can see what that brings, I'm hoping. And particularly with the timelines that we've committed to with the funding, that's where we are at that time.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Kelly has one question, Devin.
One more question. In terms of public engagement and collecting what we've heard now, is that kind of closed off now, or is there still opportunity? Like, will there be more public engagement, or is it going to be left open on Blooms for people to chime in, or is it sort of like we've gone out, got the engagement, now we're going to work within the committee and council?
No, we're gonna go back out. So we'll go back out with that additional detail. And so we've done a round kind of based on these broader directions and bigger picture documents we have. And then we'll do another round of engagement, and we'll send letters to everyone in town based on the actual draft documents and the real changes that people will want to see.
So that would be around the October time or before that?
I think it's in October
Okay.
is what I'm gonna say, yeah.
Can I ask a clarity question? So we've received this, the last two packages have been fairly hefty, and I think most have been, you know, building on one another. And then we're going to add the Acadia piece to the next meeting. So right now, we're just giving high level feedback on what you want to see come forward. And then in July, are we going to get basically the same package we received for today's with Acadia's portion maybe in it? Just based on your,
I think we'll mostly focus in the next package just on these three main issues that we've been consulting on.
okay,
Yeah, I'm not going to say the Acadia work is completely separate, but they're really just focusing in on a few properties.
okay.
And so it's really specific. We will bring that through the committee and discuss that. But there isn't as much broader implication to what they're doing, I would say. There's some, certainly, and that's why we want to marry the work together.
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah.
And the non-market work is the same. It has implications, it has policy repercussions. But some of this plan review, land use bylaw, regulatory stuff, it's going to take us a while to build that into the documents. And so we'd like to first get direction on that stuff.
So when we get it in July, it's going to be a repeat of the package we have with some fine tuning based on this conversation, because it is a hefty document. And like for me, I think and I'll ask everyone else the same. I'm going to be printing it out with the maps in front of me based on this too, because I think it really does visual. So I need that. So
Yep.
I want to give everyone the opportunity to really sit with it and not, I mean, October isn't that far away, especially if we're getting, 200-page documents every time. And so I just want to make sure everyone has enough time to actually sit with,
And
180
I have no
pages and
doubt
go
that
through it with the detail that you, to give you the most meaningful feedback that you want to make it a good document.
And I'm anticipating that certain pieces of it, you'll need more information on. So
Sure.
the direction maybe, we're really not comfortable right now with this piece. What we actually need on this piece is A, B, and C.
Okay.
And that's what we'll bring back, still steering towards a decision. But we can
Sure.
bring, like, we're going from this much to this much. The next package will, we've updated the package that you have. It will just be, it looks slightly different because we've had more time with it. It is still the same. And then we're going to add in these sections around recommendations to each action. So we'll do a job on highlighting what's new. So since you've already gone through this massive document, you can find the new stuff each time we update it.
I just want to make sure people have enough time, because even getting it a week ahead of time with that level of detail to get meaningful feedback is tough for people, I think. So I just want to make sure that I'm passing that along. Go ahead, Caroline.
So kind of adding on to that, with the next document, if there's any way to indicate the new changes or what has been taken out, because when it is a big document, then you can at least kind of scan and, oh, this is a change I need to pay attention to. And my only other comment is that in general, if we want to engage the broader community, we need to simplify the documents. They're way too language level, dense. And I think things need to be simplified if we want to really engage people.
And I'll just ask them, the committee, to say, if everything isn't sitting right or you need more time, please reach out. Because I think that if you are, probably somebody else is too. So let's make sure we've got everybody on the same page before we move forward. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
This is all part of the show, folks. So, engagement so far. So you've been sent this document, but I'm going to take you through, what we heard. Also give some of the impressions from the open house. Many of you were at the open houses, perhaps all of you, I think. And so feel free to share any different impressions that you had during the discussion afterwards. But we've had 4 planning advisory committee meetings, 10 interviews with 13 stakeholders, including many of you. We had 4 open houses with roughly 100 people, and 163 people filled out the survey. Here's a nice photo of the open house. So 71% of the survey respondents live in Wolfville. Others study in Wolfville or work in Wolfville, so we had a nice spread there. The age spread was also healthy, so about half of respondents were between 25 and 64, but we also had roughly a quarter that were younger, students, etc., and a quarter who were over 65. And roughly a third had lived in Wolfville more than 10 years. So these are the people who are most motivated about the town because they've lived here so long. But we've also had a roughly even spread of people who've lived in Wolfville for shorter periods of time. Also importantly, a quarter of respondents were renters, 22% said that housing is unaffordable for them, 18% they said they struggle to find housing, and then 16% say they live on campus. So we had a rather large number of people who have difficulties with housing, so we're getting some of their perspective in the survey as well. So the first topic I'd like to talk to you about is heritage. Folks, I'm not going to explain each of these policy slides again because, we've been through this a few times, but these are just here as reminders. So we showed people this idea, maybe we could protect a few facades or specific properties. We also discussed the idea of setting a max lot frontage for new properties in the section of Main Street to discourage excessive lot consolidation. And by far the biggest support was for protecting specific buildings with heritage protections or facades. So 71% of people support that. 57% supported limiting the width of properties on Main Street as well, so that max lot frontage. Some of the comments on heritage were, sorry that it'd actually be great if we can move this at the top just because it has a label, just so people know if feedback is coming from the open house or the survey. So, on heritage protections, people said, sounds good, very important, reproduce the facades, keep the charm. But some of the concerns were heritage is important, but growth is important too. Not all facades are as important. So let's not protect everything, including things that don't matter as much. Protect facades, yes, but you can also redevelop behind. There's a comment, focus on creating a critical mass of heritage somewhere. That was an interesting comment. Maybe there's part of town where we could, protect a greater number of homes to create a critical mass of that sense of heritage. And then on max lot width, some people love the idea. Wolfville's strength is vibrant, little business, not big box stores. Don't want long buildings on Main Street. Yes, limit width of lots. There were concerns. Some of these buildings are awful, someone said. Not great shape. People spoke about issues with fire safety, about flooding, about it being just simply impossible to bring buildings up to code with accessibility. So there was lots of feedback about don't make the restrictions so narrow that you can't redevelop these buildings that are sick and that have issues. So useful feedback. And the accessibility of some buildings is a concern. For downtown growth, we showed people both the option of going up to 6 stories with development agreements, but also extending C1 to some areas. Then over the weekend, we made an adjustment there because some people were going to remove our heads if we suggested C1 and Locust and Seaview. And there was also feedback that we really need to have a map that includes the what's currently C2, but neighborhood commercial south of downtown. So we added a board suggesting maybe we could have a larger neighborhood commercial overlay area south of downtown. So none of the growth options downtown receive more than 50% support. So, I mean, change is always hard for people to support. So the question is, which issues were people most okay with if we do have to grow? And allowing an extra 2 stories by council approval with public benefits received the most support, interestingly. And expanding C1 everywhere received 1/3 of support, about the same as expand the C1 areas slightly, but not as much as on the map. So people weren't so concerned about the precise areas. And allowing 4-story height limits also received support from 1/3 of respondents. And comments included, there's no difference between 3- and 4-story buildings. Don't put too much restrictions on development. Concerns included people don't like blocky buildings, and one person, gave a thoughtful comment that they supported 6 stories in some areas of downtown, such as Front Street, but were concerned about it in other areas, such as Main Street itself. Some of the opposition included 4-story buildings is too high, ruins aesthetics, worries about congestion, and some who just wanted to let's stop this whole thing. Do not proceed at all. I do not support accepting accelerator fund money. No, thank you. Give it back, send it back. And then on C1 expansion, expand C1 but require affordable homes, make every effort to fill in Main Street East and West. And opposition included absolutely no C1 on Seaview and Locust, and put C1 on Summer, not Seaview and Locust. So that was the focus of outrage. In terms of preferred public benefits, so if you're allowed an extra 2 stories, what public benefits do you need to provide? Affordable housing was the most popular, followed by investments in nearby public space. And this is kind of a fun section for me to read, people's ideas for what public benefits you could offer. Rooftop accessible to the public, that's fun, right? That'd be neat to bring to the town. Green space within the development, active transportation investments. There's also a concern, affordable housing is not viable in the highest cost district. Why would you put affordable housing where, properties are the most expensive? Maybe that's not the place to be incentivizing it, which was an interesting comment. Then we asked about growth incentives. So if we want to encourage growth on strategic properties in the town, where should they happen? Support for this was, a little tepid. 46% supported. The biggest support was for investing in nearby public spaces to attract development by making the streetscape nicer or parks nicer. So people found that relatively easy to support. Only 40% supported financial incentives. And in trying to understand, why is this, why weren't people supporting this? I wondered if it might be the, is there financial cost to financial incentives? But it was, I think what was mostly driving the concerns there were concerns about losing parking spots. So transform any gaps into parking were some of the comments in the survey. Removing parking is a bad idea. Beautify parking lots, don't remove it. How are parking lots, which are full of cars owned by customers and visitors to our town, considered underused? So it's clearly very important that if we're talking about reinvesting in these parking lots, the how we're going to meet the parking demand needs to be front and center. And maybe the order of items in the survey, had we switched the order, people actually might have been more supportive here. So that communication piece is very important. Speaking of parking, 85% support a large public parking spot if we can fit it somewhere downtown. And we took people through this idea, okay, we have this land. What if we made this farming? We could swap out some land and build parking here near downtown. And then that would free up parking space, which we can invest to create public space. And after setting it up in that way, fully 2/3 of people actually supported that, which I found to be very interesting. Some of the comments. Support, fine with redeveloping dike lands, nowhere else to go. Parking lots equals great, make them even bigger. That was in an open house. Opposition, the dikes cannot be used for parking. The parking lot has the best view in town. Comments, courtyard buildings on parking lots with underground parking. And this was a helpful comment. There should be a shelter between any public parking and Main Street or at least Front Street. So if there's inclement weather, people will be protected from the rain or whatever. We have to do everything possible to make that parking lot as attractive as possible, which I believe, Rob, was in your original sketches. So, we showed people the idea of, okay, what if we talk through parking requirements? Could we reduce parking requirements, eliminate parking requirements, implement, that comes later. First, we were talking about implementing paid parking and variable paid parking and using the funds from that to fund things like this improvement to Central Avenue. And okay, so the most popular answer was none of the above, but it was actually tied roughly with variable price parking. Now, interestingly, the idea of variable price parking received support from 34% of people, paid parking only 19% of people. So there is a response that if you're going to make us pay for parking, do it in a way that makes the most sense, where it's, cheaper on streets that are less in demand, only expensive on the streets that are most in demand. The Downtown Improvement Fund only received support from 28% of people. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm curious if anyone would offer insight on that. So comments and support, variable price parking by location and time of day, day of week, paid parking needed. Opposition, part of the small town feeling is the ability to just park everywhere without having to pay. So yeah, there's growth pains, And then in terms of the idea of reducing parking requirements or eliminating parking requirements, there was only 26% and 28% support for those two things. There was much more support for using parking permits to ensure residents have sufficient access to on-street parking. So in terms of neighborhood change, this is another area where so we walk people through, okay, what if in R1 we allow at least one more unit and in R2 up to 4 units on properties and can look something like this. And the actions that received the most support were unsurprisingly allowing more density in R3 and R4. I should say again, even the most popular action only received 41% of support. But this again, when you're asking people, do you want change? It's harder for them to support that. So again, we're looking at what kinds of growth are people least concerned about. So they support R3 and R4 densification. And But then, 36% of people did support allowing up to 2 units in R1 and allowing up to 4 units in R2. Only 19% supported simplifying development rules and reducing the number of zones. So interesting. I would also, if you have any insights on where that response might be coming from, it's quite possible. Yeah. Don't know. Yeah. It just seemed like it would be an unalloyed good, but in any case. So another thing that we added at the second open house based on initial feedback was having the option visualized of allowing property owners to subdivide a house in R1 without adding a unit in the backyard, because many older people own large homes, would like to subdivide, but don't necessarily want a neighbor to have a unit in their backyard. So it gives more flexibility while being something that people might be a bit less concerned about. So comments from the open house. Support, I love clustered housings. Scenario 1 and 2, these are the scenarios with less change, are both appealing. Maximize use of limited land. I love this one. One zone, max height everywhere, forced difference. Yeah, yeah, perhaps, or a student. Yeah. Opposition. There was lots on this theme. Leave R1 alone, save R1. Not enough pressure to change yet. These are $1 million homes, and not everyone should be able to live here. So, some comments included: make haste slowly. Start with scenario 1 rather than rushing to change. Allow apartments inside, but not in the rear yard suite, and make sure to enforce design guidelines. In terms of the survey, comments included: I would like to see more 2- and 3-story row house types developments and front porches. So this, some of these positive suggestions. I think there should be more smaller lots available for housing instead of having large lots everywhere. Opposition and don't mess with R1. In comments, these are not backyard suites, in response to the images. And then we showed people the options for developing large lots. And 63% of people, so a very large proportion of people, like the idea of cluster housing. This is small homes arrayed around a common green space, one of the most social forms of housing. So it's very encouraging to see that level of support. Yeah. 41% support wide lot infill with townhomes and duplexes. Only a third support deep lot infill. Again, they were looking at this specific image, but duplexes or townhomes layered deep into the lot with a lane and parking along the lane. And comments included: allow change. And opposition: we don't need to be cramped like sardines. There was interestingly a misunderstanding. 3 people thought that they'd be forced to subdivide their lot. So it's important to clear up these things. On neighborhood commercial, the most popular answer was to support neighborhood commercial at intersections, and second most popular all along Main Street to the edge of town. An important thing to take away here is that only 15% of people opposed neighborhood commercial. So it was really a question of where should we put it, and people had different ideas, but there's large support for it. It's just a matter of getting the details right. And then on Acadia, and non-market housing, we just had 2 open questions to take comments. People offered very, very thoughtful comments, so I'll just share a few of those with you. It is my understanding that many students do not want to live on campus, but a lot of people are expressing a desire for growth to happen on campus to alleviate the pressure on rental elsewhere in town. So any student housing built there should be free up existing rental units. And if there's 4,000 students on campus, there should be 4,000 accommodation units. There was concern about landlord conditions, that more should be done to ensure that landlords upkeep their homes. There was also a lot of comments about how student housing, one reason why it's not more popular among more students is it's really aimed at first-year students. and that there's a need for more student housing that addresses, mature students that don't have an RA. One person commented, who wants to be a 35-year-old with an RA looking over their shoulder? People want to be able to have kids in residence or have their accessibility needs addressed. These are really thoughtful, interesting comments. And there was some comments about investments, bring back the pool. Yeah, that's right. On non-market housing, a few people expressed, we really have to keep in mind the difference between, affordable and affordable, and people appreciate the difference between affordable in a market sense and non-market housing. Some comments on let's integrate affordable housing and non-market housing with normal market housing so we don't have as much of a stigma. A lot of people were mentioning types of needs, of families and seniors and students and people with accessibility needs all need housing that addresses their needs. And a lot of people requested co-op housing, which is so specific. I guess there must be some specific success here in town with that. Well, that's great. And yes, right. And units to buy so people can develop equity. And also people support it using cluster homes specifically for non-market housing and to make sure that non-market housing is in walkable places because transportation is part of your overall affordability picture. So we'll now switch to discussion. We are going to be meeting next week to decide what recommendations we're going to bring back to you. To be totally clear and transparent with you, we have not had that conversation yet. So I want you to know that. We have not decided what our recommendations are. And so this discussion we have now can help us decide what we bring back to you. And again, as Devin was emphasizing, the goal here is not to decide exactly how many meters to limit on lot width or what have you, but to identify if there's any concerns that the public may have or anything that we really need to address or not mess up with those recommendations. Okay. Yes,
So,
I
yeah.
guess.
So are we gonna, yeah. Are you gonna go through, yeah, we're gonna go through some questions, yeah. I'm like, wait a sec. Yeah, so are we gonna go through, do you want to go back to the beginning and start by slide? Or how, are you gonna do it by neighborhood, by parking, by topic?
Let's go by topic. I
Okay.
think that's a great idea.
Okay. So I'm, yeah, like, woo, all good.
And I might sit down so I can take notes.
Yeah, sure.
So let's discuss heritage first.
Okay, let's, yeah, because I do believe Devin is recording this, so yeah. So topic of heritage first.
Who would like to speak first?
I'm gonna give it to Wendy because I'm gonna guess she's first.
You just knew I'd say something.
100%.
The one thing that kind of stuck out for me was somebody's comment about front porches. Because there's 2 books on the heritage buildings in Wolfville, and that was the thing. Like, people had their houses close to the sidewalk, but they had a front porch so that they could interact with their neighbors. And I just thought it was neat that somebody picked up on that. And like, you can't mandate it, right? But it's an interesting notion.
Yeah, it's one of the most powerful technologies for developing social connection in neighborhoods is the humble front porch that is sufficiently large and close to the street.
Anyone else want to talk about heritage? Got a comment? Yeah, go ahead. Sure, keep it going.
Okay. I know, Tristan, you've been taxed with downtown, but to me, Main Street in its entirety has huge heritage value. And is there a reason that only going to be downtown?
Good, because he doesn't want to by the sounds of it.
Well, it's, that is a good note and we'll consider that.
Okay. Kelly?
I think of all the topics, this is kind of the one where I am maybe struggling with the most, just understanding the options and the implications and
Uh-huh.
maybe not having enough background in what that means to clearly make it a decision or feel one way or the other about what the options are that you presented. So perhaps this is an area where I feel I need more information.
Sure. Yeah.
I guess one of the things that I was wondering about with heritage, are you talking about making heritage designations so that no development can take place on these buildings? Is that what the option is? And that's something that's done through the province, correct? Is that the municipality? Okay.
Yeah.
And it's quite a process for the owner of the property to do that. I thought that was.
So-
Thanks, Mason.
We're not,
Right.
we're talking about using a menu of heritage options. So for the buildings with the most heritage value, we'd certainly be looking at protecting them, but not through this process. So if we're going to be doing, heritage protection of that scale, that would really require a heritage study. Am I speaking accurately there?
Yeah, I think a big part of this and what Tristan's work has really identified is there's some really special parts of the Main Street, and Wendy, built on that, all of the Main Street. And that's really what our design guidelines are focused on. And so when we get really particular about development, it's on Main Street almost exclusively. There's a couple of other pockets. And we want to continue that. It's just our tools are limited. And so if a property owner does not want to register their property, there are some limitations there. And so we're looking at other tools that are within our purview to try to at least maintain what we can. And some of that might be the sort of rhythm and pattern and scale of what's happening if something comes in new.
There's also relatively strong support for protecting some of the facades. So there you wouldn't be protecting the full building. It wouldn't be that same level of heritage protection. But just, you can redevelop behind, but just keep that facade in front.
It's what Devin just mentioned, is that, are you speaking to building the design guidelines deeper into what our policy is? Is that what you mean?
Yes, we're looking at, we're going to need to use our design guidelines to be effective in this area.
Right.
We're going to need to be using our design review committee. That's been a very effective process. I realize that there's mixed opinions on that, but from my seat, it's been very effective.
Great. Okay, thanks. I really like that. I like the idea of making our design review guidelines more integral to the development of Main Street. So that's something that I would definitely support. But if I'm missing other things, I don't know what I'm missing when it comes to
Yeah.
heritage. So
Well, at the moment, we've, flown a kite on a few different options. And we're going to come back to you with, hey, this is what I think we think we should move forward with, and you'll be able to respond to those in more detail. That's it. If there's any approach here that you think would be, potentially a really big problem that you've heard so far, you could also let us know. That can inform the recommendations we put together next week.
Thanks. I guess I was the same. At first, when Heritage came up, I was like, how does my brain think about it? How does my brain comprehend this? But then Heritage is a large component of how people view Wolfville. So I think we need to be really careful. So I'm looking at the downtown sort of core. I'm not sure which is Heritage and which is not. But as you talk about moving 3 stories to 4, that could be an issue in some areas. And then also, as we're talking about, moving out the commercial on Main Street and even like up Summer Street, if somebody has a home and they decide to register it for heritage, how does that impact the zoning? on, like commercial wise, like does that have any effect upon that?
So on this map,
Like,
the-
my question will be, will some people automatically, if they don't want the zone to change, will they all go out and say heritage, heritage, heritage? And how does that impact our area? That's all.
Um, so most of our registered heritage properties are on East and West Main Street. And so the darker color here, those are the registered properties. So there's the old burying ground to the far west, which isn't a building, it's a site, right? There's also the train station, and then there's the Little Theater, and there's Herman's. Yeah. Yeah, so, and there's also properties that people maybe think are registered, like the Blomidon Inn, and they're not.
Mhm.
And so it depends. I don't think that would happen, a rush to register properties. It is a tool, though. We've had a really successful campaign in the 90s to have properties registered. We don't have people coming to us and lining up to register their properties. I think a part of this may just be a push to try to get people to register certain properties that we really value. Whether that happens or not is a separate piece from this.
Yeah, the heritage protections would restrict what someone could do with the building, but it's not as though someone would be forced to redevelop their building based on the zoning. So don't think zoning would be incentivized to get heritage protections to protect themselves from zoning or anything like that.
Can I go out on a limb and say that I think people confuse the words or interchange the words heritage and character. So it's not necessarily heritage in the protection viewpoint, as opposed to maintaining the character of our Main Street, which I think are not the same thing. So for me, I think all of Main Street should have character protection, and I think people who've done that well is the Blomidon with Thornley next door when they did that. Paddingstone has done a wonderful job adding on carriage houses that look great. I think Hotel Wolfville did a great job of integrating into that space nicely, and it maintained the character all along. So for me, if it's design guidelines for character, 100%. I don't, I think there are buildings that probably have heritage, and if we could get them to designate themselves as heritage, awesome. The rest would be character for me.
I think I would agree with that. Yeah, it's about, it's good. So, to me, independent does not have character that fits with the rest of the street. So as buildings change, or if there's an opportunity to work with an owner, that the character and the style, maybe it's more of a historic style, but there are many different styles along the street. Looking at Wendy, I don't know all the different, but I think it is about the interest of the buildings, and there is some history to them, but it doesn't mean this heritage designation.
And yeah,
Jody, that's a really good point. The distinction between
You
heritage and character. I'm the one who's always banging on about the Shoppers Drug Mart and the new development beside the Legion. And it's not like I'm against new buildings or new developments. It's just, they just don't match the character. Like they're from somewhere else or something, or they're, dreamed up in some other province, maybe. And there was something else I was going to say, but it'll come back. Yeah.
Al?
Yeah, so just to that point, so around character is sometimes the architectural features, sometimes it's the feel and pacing of the street and sort of how you're feeling as you're moving down it and the articulation of the buildings. And so I think it's really easy to get these two things conflated. because our heritage is really about specific architectural forms that we're thinking about at a particular time or materials. Whereas some of the things we're suggested here are more about the pacing and style of how the actual street is going to feel. And I think you can't really have both necessarily. You kind of have to make a decision about whether, as things evolve and buildings are going to change, we're not going to have a lot more brownstone buildings necessarily. The stone buildings that we have here are probably the last ones that we're going to get for a very, very long time. And so new materials, new styles, those sorts of things, we have to be, whether we're open to those and whether there's particular components of them that we want to keep or things that we want to, I don't know, necessarily ignore. So I think to some degree, these are conflated for a good reason. So.
That's that part. What about, so does the next slide have what Alan was just speaking about, the pace or the change in? So you can't combine 6 of them together to make one. So the pacing of them, does everyone agree? Was that on the next slide? The lot, yeah, the lot width. Did everyone agree that that pacing was reasonable, or do we like to change it? Or
Yeah, if I can add here, I think, you know, we're not getting into the details today of, you know, exactly how many meters.
sure.
But I think an important piece of feedback was to make sure that we allow enough width so that some of these buildings that have challenges could reasonably be redeveloped while still, you know, preventing an entire block from becoming a single building.
I like the pacing for myself. I like to have a different building every so often. The same building all along the street would be boring.
I agree.
But yeah, Kelly.
I think maybe for me, I would need to see more detail, perhaps. Like there's probably a happy medium. I wouldn't want to say that we couldn't combine lots to do something, especially in that area up above, like around Summer.
And I was only referring to Main Street.
All right, are we only referring to Main Street on this?
Yeah. That's right. So yeah,
Okay.
there's very few street names here. So this is Summer Street here.
Yeah. But
And
if
so
you
this area, it just excludes the pharmacy there and it goes as far as Church Brewery.
So I think that maybe, I guess if you're looking at expanding C1, then what you're talking about here would apply to anywhere C1 is?
No,
No.
yeah, emphatically not, because there's lots of areas in C1 that we want to encourage change. So there's all
Right.
these parking lots on Front Street we want to encourage development on. There's Summer Street. There's potentially East and West on Main
Okay.
Street.
So
And
this is
so,
just-
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
between Elm and
Right.
Church Brewery. Yeah.
Okay, yes, then I agree with that. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't say that. Sorry, my apologies. Caroline?
So maybe you can just clarify for me. So when I look at the black dotted line, I think it's I don't know what they call it, it's the Royal Bank Shoppers Drug Mart area is not in there, and the parking area and around where Devour is. So, but in some ways, if they're going to be redeveloped, and I don't know if they ever will be, but why wouldn't we want to make them look more like the rest of the street? I suppose I'm just concerned that because we cut them out, then we're not applying some of that character piece, and I may be confusing things.
You're not confusing things. So that's a trade-off. So for example, with the Shoppers, you know, if we said, you know, there's a maximum lot width here, then that could mean that it might take longer to encourage them to redevelop, or it might just not happen. Because I believe there are 2 properties there, and you know, you might have to have 2 separate buildings. And so by carving that out, it's just saying, you know, the greater priority here is encouraging a new building that would bring the building up to the street.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we can rely on design guidelines, and also there's options to have max width for the actual shops to encourage more small shops.
Thank you.
in my experience, the best way.
Rob, do you want to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sitting in the gallery here. The best way, if you want real change in a downtown versus you want to preserve things, one of the best ways to do it is controlling height. So the Shoppers Drug Mart, if you really wanted that to change, you could put a 5-story height limit on it. And all of a sudden it changes the value of that land and it makes projects more feasible. If you wanted to preserve things, you could keep things at 2 stories of height, and the chances are of somebody knocking down a building, but they can only get 2 stories of height. That pretty much limits things. So we could, we've talked about kind of a blanket height in the downtown precinct, but it could be that we use schedules to say certain properties are limited to this height. Shoppers, maybe we go to 5 stories or something where we really want to encourage change. So I just throw that out there as an idea as well.
Yeah, and thank you, Rob, because in the report, we went through a few options for heritage protections, and that was the one that we hadn't discussed, so. And Rob, do you want to come over so we can?
Sit closer.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh.
Just a question. So we're talking about limiting lot frontage. So that's each individual parcel has to only have that much frontage. So there would be distinct parcel for each one, or, okay.
It would only come into play when someone wanted to consolidate multiple parcels.
Okay,
That
so
would
the
be the trigger.
existing parcel fabric
Would not change.
It's not going to change unless
Yeah.
someone chooses to change it.
That's right.
I'm just wondering about situations where, I wanted to say God forbid, but I don't mean that actually. If you were in a situation where you had someone who wanted to make a lot of investment, they wanted to buy a few parcels at the same time, consolidate those parcels, and say, build 4 or 5 stories of housing, office space, whatever it is, in a mixed use environment. But they were committed to maintaining sort of a minimum lot frontage at grade. So you had 6 shops, but on top, it was one consolidated building with, 1 elevator, 1 set of stairs, etc. Would that be permissible in this environment?
Yes, so in our jurisdiction scan on this, as just a brief jurisdiction scan, some places like San Francisco set clear limits on the parcel. Other places, which I forget at the moment, set limits just on the size of shops. So both options are completely reasonable.
Yeah, I think just from my perspective, it's the experience that you have at the street level that's the thing that we want to maintain and encourage. What sort of happens after, the second floor doesn't really matter anymore. So.
Wendy.
Just as a note, there used to be more buildings in the commercial zone that were 3 stories. For example, Waterbury's department store, which was in the parking lot, that Shoppers Drug is now, that was a large building, 3 stories. So was the building where the supplement store is. That was large. They were all wooden though, so there were fires. But to me, if you want to talk like heritage, 3 stories is kind of what we had back in the day. So that just goes through my mind as something that we might want to value.
The only thing that comes to mind for me, Tristan, is we were talking about like the pink area. We wouldn't necessarily put heritage protections or character protections, I guess, because I appreciate the differentiation we're making here. You guys hear me?
I should say the existing design guidelines do still apply everywhere in
Okay.
there.
Yeah, because when you think about the Harvest Moon Trail, for example, and the
farmer's market and the dike lands and the view planes that we have around our harbor and from the trail, you know, larger, taller buildings next to those, right next to the trail system. I know we have another study around redevelopment of the area near the rail zone, but anyway, just, but if you're telling me that we still have design guidelines for the rest of town, because I think what's coming to mind for me too is that the design review committee now in this new scenario becomes even more important perhaps than it is now. I think it does meet as needed based on development proposals coming in, but it's something council might want to beef up in terms of expertise or, you know, support in a more, in a bigger way. Because you'll rely on that a lot more.
Yeah, it'd be more meaningful input.
Yeah.
Good.
Fair point.
Good.
I think it's interesting that now that Alan said that out loud. And it is the experience on the street, because I think we do have to think about accessibility too. So if we're, you know, it depends on what it looks like. Like, I don't, sounds terrible maybe, but I think, but it is about the feel and what it looks like. I say often, I think Ian did a great job of his Hotel Wolfville. It fits there. He did a really great job of thinking how that would fit in that space. Yeah, right. I think it was just, and others not so much. So if the streetscape and that feel is the same, I don't know how we make that work, but what the rules are to make that work, but that for me is what it is. It's the feel.
I just think that, you know, the current Loblaws development
Mhm.
is a good example of where these could have played a larger role had
Mhm.
we had them in place now, because, you know, we tried to enforce the guidelines, but at the end of the day, they were just kind of guidelines,
Guidelines.
right?
Yeah.
And you can only go so far. That, and I mean, maybe we'll never have that situation again, because it's kind of don't have another Loblaws, but there's the Shoppers building.
Shoppers,
So
yeah.
I think it's a good example of what we want to kind of be protected against, I guess, going forward.
Great. We might want to keep moving
Yeah,
since there's
cool.
a few topics to go through.
Sure.
If anything comes to anyone, we can always come back to a few themes. So downtown growth. So I might just go to this list of options. But any comments?
Expanding the C1 area.
Both expanding C1 and also increasing height limits to 4 stories as of right, and allowing a two extra stories by development agreement and with public benefits.
Yes.
Go ahead, Caroline.
I think it's important just to be clear when it's allowing an extra 2 stories. Is that 2 stories on what that building is now, 2 stories on what's allowed now, or 2 stories on what might be agreed in general?
There would be 2 stories on top of whatever is as of right.
Okay.
So if it's 3 stories as of right, there would be a maximum of 5 with
Right.
development agreement. If we put it up to 4 stories as of right, that would be 6 stories.
Thank you.
I just want to make a comment that when we're looking at expanding the commercial zone, I think that I feel it's important that we're not just making amendments to the C2 that we have in place today, because I think if we do that, we're kind of doing what we already did a number of years ago, which is creating this additional zone to kind of plug a gap, but we want to, that's created a number of problems, which we want to try to get away with. So I just want to make sure we're not doing the same thing that we already did. If that makes sense. Yeah. And I think I know in the initial day for the open house on the C1 map, in my opinion, the expansion of C1 on that map wasn't where it should be. Like that whole area, I mean, right now we have an extensive C2 area up around Highland, Gasboro, Summer, and that's not even highlighted on this map anywhere. So I think what we need to see is like, here's everywhere today that's C1, here's everywhere today that's C2, but see that doesn't even really show it, right? This is just showing us an extension of the C1. What we need to see is where is C2, where is C1, and what would it look like if we just made C2, C1? Show an overlay of those, because I haven't seen that on any of the maps yet. Because in this scenario, you're still going to be left with some pockets of C2 potentially, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, that depends if C2 still exists when we come back to you, but your point is well made, and we'll make sure that we come back to you with specifics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a list of what C2 is? I know it's neighborhood commercial, but is it in the package of what, or do you know what page it's in on the package? C2 is listed out? Or
No, we don't have it listed out in the package. I don't have
didn't-
I have a handy spreadsheet that compares C1 and C2, but C2 currently has very limiting requirements for how big a property can be. I think it's only 40% of the lot, and
Yeah.
then you need
no sign?
limited surface area space, and then you need a certain amount of parking. And when you put those three things together, basically meant you weren't allowed to do anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Al?
I just want to go back to sort of like a first principles perspective, but so the idea behind this is really trying to drive additional investment in the downtown is sort of the gist, right? So I think expanding opportunities for C1, getting rid of C2, which is a little confusing, makes sense. And that also adheres to sort of increasing height potential, because we know as we increase development rights and what can actually be done on the site, then that increases the value ultimately, and people will be more inclined to reinvest in those properties. So I think that makes sense. It's finding the balance between, say, 4 and allowing for 6 for me. The only question I did have, because I remember this happening with the micro lofts, and it's a bit off topic, but I think it's relevant to the fiscal health of the town. How does the PVSC view office space versus commercial? Is it considered commercial or not? And how do they make the split between mixed use buildings? I think is the other question as well.
It's a bit of a longer explanation, just because we've had, where in those specific contexts you're talking about, we've had kind of split assessments, but then we have seasonal usage. And so it took us a number of years to resolve that with PVSC. I can send the committee some notes. We did have PVSC come in and we did talk through those specific issues. I think it would be me talking for 20 minutes at you. So maybe we can park that question. Yeah.
I'm not sure it was extraordinarily helpful. I'm not sure they answered the questions anyway, but
Exactly. Yeah.
honestly, but go ahead.
So I just want to get this straight. I mean, I know how we're expanding the C1, but C1 is not going to be taking all over C2, because as we heard in the open house, there's some areas in C2 that are really residential areas. And I'm looking up by, what's the street?
Locust?
Yeah, those. So I don't want to just see C1 and like take over all of C2. So if, for instance, we do that with C2 and people are saying they don't like C2, would that go into a different zone like R3 or do you know what I mean? Because
Sure. So
you can't just take all of C2 all of a sudden and make it C1.
certainly. So we're not suggesting to take all the C2 everywhere on the land use map and turn it all into C1. Something that we have been considering is replacing C2 with a commercial overlay. So getting out of the downtown for a moment. So for all of those neighborhood commercial components we were discussing at intersections or from Main Street to the edge of town, we might allow in some areas, R1, R2, R3, R4, or what have you, And the commercial overlay says inside that building that you're allowed, if you want to have a shop, if you want to have a corner store, if you want to have an office, whatever, you're allowed to do that here. Whereas one block over, you're allowed the exact same shape of house, but you can't have commercial in it. So that would be a different approach to commercial in those areas. In the area south of downtown, where, you know, we've received pushback that we want people both want to, there are some voices who want to have a kind of residential mixed commercial character, and other voices who are saying we really need to focus on enabling change to happen. And basically, you know, two options that we've been discussing, and we discussed with some folks at the open house, is do we want to take C1 and put an overlay that adjusts it a bit? So for example, in C1, you're required to bring the building right up to the sidewalk. Well, what if there was an overlay that said, actually, that's 10 feet back because Summer Street is a bit more residential in character, and that way it lines up better with the other houses, but you're allowed some of the other things that you're allowed in C1, you know, take up more of the lot, etc. Or we could come from the other direction and say, you know, we allow R3 or R4 here, and we put on the commercial overlay.
That you have an overlay. Sorry, you have an overlay allowing commercial in these areas as well. And that there could be other tweaks in those overlays where you, like the parking requirements could change so that we're encouraging more on-street parking.
Just in the interest of plain language, I think when we start talking overlays and we're trying to talk about simplifying the zoning, just a comment, I think it's, I'm sitting here going, okay, if we, exactly.
Yeah, in a way, it is, overlays are kind of a new technique, but what they do offer you in comparison to having to have a different zone for every new type of use, you can reduce the number of uses and then you just add overlays that would have like a height overlay, kind of a precinct, and a commercial overlay, and some even get into frontage overlays where the, you know, the frontage and setbacks and stuff can change. So in Halifax and Charlottetown, a lot of cities are now moving towards overlay mapping rather than having a distinct zone.
So it's a zone with a restriction.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. It's a spatial way to restrict things. It's
Yeah,
To me,
it's-
I just fail to see the difference between what you're saying and what we have now.
Yeah.
That's true.
You can do a better job of explaining.
Well, yeah,
I
Yeah.
I think that what Beverly said, like, you know, and we also have to think about kind of the administrative load on our town too. Like you have all these different rules in all these different areas, whether it's an overlay or another zone. And like, that's part of the problem now with, you know, being able to get things done and do developments and see that growth in that downtown area, is that there's all these limitations and rules because of a commercial neighborhood zone that was meant to do just what you're saying, but in fact, you can't get anything done. So I think that it's important we move away from those restrictions.
Mhm.
But that's why I think it'd be good to see a map of like, here's everywhere where we have C2. To your point, Jen,
Yeah.
like maybe it doesn't make sense to just blanket it, but we haven't really seen that up on the screen.
Mhm.
So.
We'll come back with specifics.
'Cause I'm struggling to, and I think the word is improvement, not necessarily growth in this area, because I think, I said this earlier, I think that all of those beautiful homes that were all single family homes along Summer and all everywhere in there, you know, became student housing, whether it was meant to be or not, but that's what the zoning did to it. So it is what it is. But I wonder if you changed it again, does it become more, you know, an investment and an improvement come in those spaces, more like an Agricola Street where they have some nice commercial on the bottom and housing on the top, or, you know, professionals live in them. It doesn't change the intent and improve what is there, or at least diversify it. So you get investment, improvement, and just something different. But that's my feeling on that. So I am looking forward to see what that might look like. Caroline?
I think I need to understand it more, but the idea that if you have, we're looking to expand the commercial area because what I heard from discussion earlier, and I got the impression perhaps from the WBDC, is we need more office space, things like that. To me, if that's what we need, if that can be done, and from the outside, the building doesn't change, then I would say, why not? But I don't know how that works.
Want to move on to the next topic? We're probably
Sure.
going to run out of time. Huh?
Yeah, so moving on, I'll just say on that point that a few people in the open houses mentioned that, you know, we need these offices and it'd be great to have them a block away from Main Street, somewhere like Summer, rather than reducing the vibrancy on Main Street. So a point. So
We did touch on height. Does anyone want to do that?
Feedback on height.
Yeah, we didn't give any feedback on height.
I did.
Yeah, you did. 3 stories. Okay.
And I'm curious, so one idea that came up in the open houses was, well, do we have the same height limit everywhere in the downtown? You know, maybe Front Street, we allow higher buildings. Some folks express less concern about higher buildings on Front, but more concern on Main Street. How do people feel about that?
I get concerned about view planes when we're getting close to the dike lands and our recreational experiences and stuff. So I think if council was in the future allowing more height, or depending on how the zoning, I think that would be considerations to think about, because we have a pretty small downtown and a lot of massing and taller buildings. I mean, you think about Railtown and how that looks right there. Okay, you don't see anything beyond that. You see around it right now because of the way town is built, right? So just that's would be my only caution around no height restrictions outside of Main Street.
Yeah, when Railtown was being discussed, I wasn't on council, but viewplane was definitely an item. Being able to see Blomidon in this town means a lot.
Yeah.
I should know the answer to this question, but I don't. Do we have protected view planes in the plan?
We
Is
have
it-
one from none in the downtown.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it something maybe we should consider in tandem with height? Same time?
Yeah.
I would say absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's something we mused about a little bit in the context of doing some type of a heritage strategy, which would look at natural heritage, like when you do it from that angle. But I think this could be an exercise where you could look at that. And view planes, as you guys know, it's not like you protect the entire thing. Like if you think of Citadel Hill in Halifax, you know, there are tall buildings built around the hill, but there are sort of view planes. If you sort of think about triangles going in certain areas, in the same way that we designated it for the new development on the from Reservoir Park. Yeah.
Michael?
Do corridors so that you protect views of the waterfront, so you can't stick a building at the end of a street to the water.
I think this all gets it's all related and getting to the crux of the problem. Some of the feedback was around people saying buildings should be able to go to 4 stories if the expectation is 1 floor of that is for affordable housing. And I keep coming back to that, like the more restrictions you put on, then where are we going to create that housing, that affordable housing for people. Because I'm not necessarily seeing it in other neighborhoods, but I don't know, like I'd be thinking, well, I might not be thrilled about a fourth story, but if it's going to provide X number of new units at a, that might be a trade-off that needs to happen. I don't know.
So we could also use density bonusing in a case like that, where maybe in one case it's affordable. You get the 4-story if there's some public benefit. And one would be affordable, the other might be that rooftop deck, the other might be other public art, lead buildings, those sorts of things. As long as you meet some kind of public benefit, you get that extra story.
My experience with public benefit is it is the best way to divide your community in half, which is not really what I'm aiming for, to be honest. I since like everyone I've been, been here as long as I have, everyone we've been a part of has divided us every time. Jen?
I think,
Sorry, what's divisive? I just wanting to make sure I understand the choosing the public benefit or whether it's.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I might think is a public benefit might not, but what you think is a public benefit, and I would hazard a guess, I might love a rooftop deck and others might think, no way. And it has been fairly divisive every time we've used it. So it's nice to just set expectations, tell everybody what the expectations are. And I too, because we've tried to do affordable housing and it's not deeply affordable housing. And then it becomes back to that, oh, it's $100 cheaper. And we gave them a whole bunch of stuff for not a lot. And I feel like it's always come back to kick us in the butt a little bit, but that's my feeling on that.
Jennifer, were you about to speak?
yeah, I feel like the height is always, since I've been on council, is kind of a contentious issue. So it was 3, then we did 292, that's like 4.5. And then we did the other, we did Maple and we did the other one, there's 6. And everybody's like, well, how many is there? So I'm not opposed to 4, but I would be opposed to more than 4 if you had a development agreement, like if you came to us for a development agreement on Main Street, like everybody else has done. I don't want to see it more than 4. And then I'm just wondering, would somebody that already has a 3-story, would they bother putting another story on? Or would you be looking at somebody that's a 1-story or 2-story that's where you get the best bang for your buck? And then would these people make it accessible? Because as Jody's saying, to have public space, if it was accessible and you have this great view of Blomidon, that might be, it's still divisive, but I don't think accessibility is divisive, in that. So I think we just really need to be clear of the as of right development agreement and the site plan, because we have been, I'm sorry, all over the place with the heights and trying to explain that to the public, or at least I have. So I'm not opposed to the 4-story, but honestly, like when you start to say, oh, you can have 6 if it's a development agreement, or if you already have 3, you can add 2. Like there just needs to be really clear parameters in the downtown for me. That's all.
Oh,
Just
sorry,
so
Caroline.
I understand, you're supportive of 4 as of right or through site plan, but nothing more through DA.
No, I don't,
Not in the,
Yeah.
okay.
But I think, but I think that we have to be cognizant of, a view plane. And I know you've written that down, so that would matter. So if the 4-story is going to, have a remarkable detriment to that, then I'd have to think about it. But right now, I'm not opposed to the 4-story.
Caroline?
My preference would be 3 stories, but I also recognize we need housing. I feel that anything above 3, and I would say maybe go to 4. So if it was 2, it could go to 4. If it was 3, it could go to 4. But any ability to do that, the funds must go, I don't know how it would work, but towards affordable housing. To me, that's if we're going to do anything, it's affordable housing. It's not nice art or a nice bench or whatever it is. It really has to be affordable housing. The other thing, though, I think the street wall is really important. So in other words, we're used in Wolfville to, as we walk down the street, it's, you know, 1, 2, or some are 3. As Wendy said, some of the older buildings are 3. But if they're building new, or even if you have an old facade, if we make that step back 3 meters after 2 stories, maybe, or you could do it 3 meters all the way around the building so you can allow view corridors between it. Maybe it could go to 4, but I think when you walk down the street and suddenly all the buildings are 3 and 4 stories either side of you, whereas if you walk down a street where it's 2 stories, 1 or 2, I think 2 stories would work. But then it steps back, but not just a meter or 2 meters. It's got to be a good distance. Then it feels more open and perhaps more like was intended. And you see the street, you see the street. My impression right now, when I walk down Main Street, going east, is all I see is the 3 stories of 292, and they're now in the process of building another one on top. And that, to me, a view has been lost there already because of the way it's been built. And I know that's supposed to step back, I think, at 4, but the 3 stories have changed the view of the street.
Right, last comment on height. Because it's 8:03 and we're not only here, so,
For here, for you.
yeah, go ahead.
I just, how high does the ladder truck go?
Oh, generally 8 or 10 stories. I don't know about Wolfville specifically.
Yeah, Wolfville specifically, how high does it go?
Probably, yeah. It was bought to take, so it would service tower,
Okay,
Crowell Tower,
okay.
sorry.
So that's as high as your emergency services can go. So that's an important
it.
finding for true.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
No, they-
we bought the truck. Yeah, quickly.
I was just gonna say that I don't believe that the investment required for improvement and change makes sense unless it's 4.
Thank you. Next one, public benefits. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, go ahead, folks. I'm
Yeah.
just taking down Kelly's note.
Yeah.
And so
Move along.
public benefit, I
no,
think
he-
actually,
Are we-
Are you skipping public benefit?
I think I'd rather skip that if
Okay.
that's okay for time.
Okay.
And because parking is an important conversation.
People can give you feedback if they want to give you feedback on something else. Okay,
That's
thank
right.
you.
You can always reach out either here or you can, yes, absolutely. Was wondering if you'd like to respond to this finding that 2/3 of people actually supported this idea of a farmland swap. I know there was some real concerns about this idea at the last planning advisory committee meeting. So just like to take any feedback on this now.
The feedback I heard, I'll open it up, was that, and I feel the same way. So it depends on what you do with Front Street, and and if you've still got good view planes out to Blomidon and over theirs, then they would be in favor of that. I think that looked like a lot of parking. It did to me, and it did to pretty much everyone I talked to, especially the one to the right. That's out there. Yeah, and yeah. The one in the middle was not palatable. That's a good way to put it. And the one to the left was more so because there's already buildings to that side. But it was only palatable if Front Street and the parking there was used for community space, housing, densification, whatever, all of the other things that were important. We and they thought were important. Does everybody else think though? That's what I heard there, but that's
Anyone else?
because I specifically asked.
I think the two taken together seems like too much. That's just the only way I can put it. But I'm like Jody, I'm looking at what we already have behind, which is that's now the Title Fitness
Mhm.
Center there. And it's next to the Home Hardware, which is also a parking lot on that side. So it kind of is putting like by like. Whereas the other one is behind the Railtown parking, but it really feels like it's encroaching more somehow, even though they're both going on to farmland and they're both getting closer to the dikes, but just for some reason that's my thought on it. And again, I'm gonna bring us back to recreational use and visitor experience and community experience. And we are looking at, the dikes will be raised, and thankfully it looks like we're gonna have recreational pathways and they are gonna be over on that dike. So to me, the more we can look at, if we're doing redevelopment around behind Railtown, that could, and we do have an opportunity in the future, and I know that's in one of our other discussions. Having a big parking lot sited next to maybe a potential new visitor landing zone for bikers and whatnot behind Railtown would not work too well. But anyway. But I heard a lot too at the open houses about don't lose parking.
Yeah.
A lot of people were don't lose parking. So I know it's an issue.
Right. Yeah, Kelly.
Why didn't you look at integrating the one on the right more into that existing parking lot? Like kind of just
Am I right or you're right?
the one by Railtown?
Oh,
Like,
oh.
it's just kind of this weird
Yeah.
block that's
Yeah.
off of it. Like, why didn't that, is there a reason for that?
Yeah, we just extended, there's parking on the left side of Railtown. And so we just extended that parking. The little island that's in between was meant to be a stormwater garden in between the two to green up and leave trees so that you're not seeing a giant parking lot on that option. But they could be connected. I mean, certainly the one on the left, you have to drive all the way to the end of the street and then come back and around. Maybe there's a better configuration where you have access from Front Street directly through there or through Railtown.
Yeah.
So there's probably better ways to
So
get
there's
that
only
same
that
thing.
one way in.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yep. There's a pathway that comes through by the trail, the rail trail. And then there's a pathway that is connected with some kind of overhead canopy covered structure all the way to Front Street. But there's probably better, I get what you're saying. There's probably better ways to make that more connected to the
Right.
downtown.
I don't know. I struggle with it. Like 1 minute I'm, yes, it seems fine. And the next minute I'm like, no. So.
And I get a kick. You said all the way. It's like 100 meters. And the other,
Yeah.
like maybe 50. But that's just, I'm capable of walking and I acknowledge that. Jen.
I do think we need to look at quite a little bit of parking down there, and just because we have no idea what we're going to be doing with our town hall library, we might have to take another look at that. And then also when you're talking about developing Front Street and that beautiful little walkway area, that's another focal point that's closer. So I'm happy that 2/3 of people were like, yes, I do like the parking. I think maybe in phases. Maybe in phases on that, depending on what we're doing, but we're definitely going to need more parking if we're going to be developing Front Street. Yeah.
I guess I was thinking on the same lines, Jen, like, again, the middle one, and Tristan, this was an idea that you were sharing with Wendy and I. We did a little walk with Tristan on one of the open houses day, our little heritage walk, but Tristan had raised an idea that has come up, I think, from your firm and maybe through some of the interviews about having more of a walkway, like, is it Center Avenue there? Then there's that little spot right beside the liquor store, like there's that little parking side of behind the NSLC. And anyway, we were talking about like,
Towards the animal hospital?
yeah,
Okay.
just so that middle corridor, and it's
Yeah.
contiguous with little Center Avenue, right? And if Center Avenue becomes part-time or on weekends, a pedestrian mall, and you have this sort of experience of being able to move toward the waterfront. I thought that was a neat idea. If there was some way we could get rid of that parking between those two buildings, make it like a nice green space for people to invite them to our redeveloped waterfront. And if we do that, and you're looking at a big parking lot, I think that that would endanger some of maybe the opportunity for that. So I guess another reason to sort of rethink that, the one right in the middle there. And, or as Kelly was saying, like, maybe we're talking, instead of a big block, we're talking about maybe a parallel expansion with what's already there at Railtown, and beside the building. That wouldn't seem quite as obtrusive.
A huge drop off there, though.
It is, yeah.
One of the other things we didn't say about this was that this is part of a paid parking strategy as well, too.
Right.
It could be that this new lot is the free lot in town. There's 100 parking spaces here. And then we look at paid on-street parking, and it's variable price. So on the weekends, it's more expensive than through the week and
Yep.
that sort of thing. But it's a way to kind of offset the some of the negative feedback that you would have with a paid parking strategy.
How many parking spots in each of the lot?
They're about 100 each,
Yep, Caroline?
about 1 acre.
I just, I just have to say this. I know from the results, it's very clear that I have a very different take on the parking. I just feel we are not addressing the issue of why are we even bringing all the cars downtown, and why are we not working on encouraging more active transportation, more public transportation, and park and rides and micro transit, rather than still thinking we've got to bring everyone downtown in a car. And I know there's a need, but I just have to say that, and I know I know it's totally different from what everyone else is thinking. I just have to say.
Jason?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm a little put off by those two parking lots just because of their size and that they're just big rectangles on what was farmland. And so could those be connected and made smaller? So that, like, I think I talked with Tristan about, on Front Street of like, wouldn't it be nice if they could beautify the parking lots that are there, and showed some lovely pictures of, of the parking lots in place where they surrounded them with gardens and so forth, plantings. And so isn't there an opportunity there to bring people down more onto the marshes with smaller or longer parking lots? They don't stick out so much, because I know with those kind of big parking lots, like you see at next to the Legion, that new one, is invariably they put up these huge towers with lighting, and that nothing's going to spoil the view plane in the evening, or that, or on a starlit night, then lights glaring, which it's inevitable in these type of big kind of suburban style parking lots. So, maybe something a little more fluid with, that sort of drapes along the side of what's there already and not quite so deep.
Thank you. Want to move on from parking? We're at
Yeah.
8:15. I'm cognizant of everyone's time. We haven't even got to the new section yet.
Does anyone want to speak on reducing parking requirements, eliminating parking requirements, variable price parking? This is a topic we've already taken some feedback from you on. There's not necessarily anything new here. We're going to keep moving unless anyone tackles me. So now importantly on neighborhoods. Comments on anything that they heard or concerns, direction?
Just as a recollection, we had the option one. We went from 8 zones down to 7 zones. We consolidated 2 zones. The other one I think went down to 5 zones. We lost 3 zones, and then the most extreme, we went down to 2 zones.
I think everyone I spoke to was the option 2 and 3 were off like there was, let's gently roll ourselves into this because we've already enabled so much development. Can we just take a pause? Not even a pause. Can we just slowly roll instead of jump?
That's the same with me. Option 2 and 3 were not considered by anybody that I spoke to at the open house. It was the option 1, where people were. And I think those maps were really good, like visuals, with the coloring, you're like, whoa, okay, that one looks manageable. This one looks like it's just scary for everybody.
I think 2 units in R1 was pretty good. ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, well, the pictures just showed basically another house in the backyard. So I don't think that was what people had in mind for accessory dwelling units. So I don't know if that's what scared people off, but I think most people would be seemed reasonable from R1 to 2 units with some constraints on lot size, all that kind of again, some restrictions on what that might be. My biggest one is owner occupied, but that's my personal feeling.
Can I ask a question? Does 2 units, is that enough for, say, an older person who has a very large house who wants to rent part of it? And this is just a very honest question, based on your experience in Wolfville. Are there people who have such a large house that, it'd be more viable if they could split it into 2 rental units, or plus their own unit? I mean,
I don't know.
That's the feedback I've gotten.
Same.
I've gotten phone calls on that. They would have aged and stayed in place some people are even talking about bungalows to have 1 unit up, 1 unit down.
and
then
2 units is what people
2
are.
units, 2 units.
They
yeah.
don't need 3.
Yeah. And so when you're saying 2, you're not saying like 1 unit is an accessory unit, like 1 house and then an accessory, or 2, are you saying 2 units inside?
This question right now, I'm saying, is 2 units inside that 1 house.
So the
Yeah.
outside looks the same. You can't
Yeah,
tell.
okay.
It looks like a single family home.
Yeah.
And it could be a single family home or 2 apartments, basically.
And just to be clear, you're saying 2 is all we need. No one's saying that they wanted to subdivide their house into 3 units.
I haven't heard 3 units. I've heard some people ask, could they have an accessory unit that
That's
have a
all.
large lot? So they have their house. Could they have an accessory unit? They would rent out the house, or, family members would stay there and they would age in place with a smaller place, like a 2-bedroom.
Right.
But that's not what you're talking about when you say 2 units though,
Right,
right?
that's right.
Okay.
But how do folks feel about, being able to subdivide a house into 2 units and an accessory unit as well and back, including in R1?
We keep saying that as age in place, but then that person actually becomes a landlord of 4 people. I'm not sure that's what aging in place actually means. So I think we're muddying some waters in my mindset on that, but go ahead, Caroline.
I think it's what we presented was overwhelming to people. And so I think people step back from it. They don't want change. I work with seniors. I was talking to a client recently, and they had talked a while back about wanting to be able to subdivide their home so they could stay in it and have other people in there, someone who could shovel the walkways and do those things. So I think there is interest. I would like to see the opportunity, but I think some of it's about allowing, again, the exterior to look unchanged. So if the house looks the same from the outside, does it matter if there's 1 family or 3 families living there? I know there might be some questions about parking, but again, to have the ability, if it's a 2 or 3-story home, I feel we need to ensure there are opportunities where a backyard suite or an addition is on a single story, so there is the chance to increase the density. But I do think there needs to be, or it needs to be made clear to people how they can do it without being a landlord. So
Yeah.
do they make it a condo, or can they sell the different parts off? Because I know in Toronto, you have 3-story buildings and people own the different sections, but maybe that's called a mini condo. I don't know what it is, or it's a leasehold or something, but I feel I would certainly prefer to see that happen than any more height being added to any other zones. Residential zones.
I just would add to that, that some of the details that I heard, when talking about creating the unit within, like a second unit within an R1, was concern over whether there would be an adequate sewage capacity. I mean, I think that a lot of people in town are worried about our infrastructure, and although we tell them the upgrades are there, but there still was concern with that. Some people were also talking to me, and I had a call from a neighbor afterwards about, what will they do? What will town do to make sure that when people do this, that they meet fire codes, that they meet all the different building codes? Like, you can't just take a single home and turn it into two. And there's a whole kind of sort of regulatory side of that. And is the town ready to invest in that as well? Because that's going to be needed if people are going to be doing this. So it was just, again, more of the devil in the details. But I think it tells us that when we're communicating that, and if that in fact is the decision of council, that will be important to include, so people are know that infrastructure has the capacity and that these places will be safe to live in.
Evan?
I just thought I would address those two. So the one piece is we are investing over $7 million in our sewer treatment plant. So I think there's a lot of different infrastructure issues, some localized, but big picture, we're sort of making the right investments. And I think a single unit, from a capacities perspective, is in the bigger picture is very small, just straight on the system. I just want to address the building code issue though, because this is something that I face in my office all the time. So what we're seeing is, because we don't allow these things, we're seeing unsafe conditions being created. And so what we're trying to put in place is a framework that people have an avenue to come into us and create a unit that is inspected and is safe. I know there's a lot of units that aren't because there is no pathway. This isn't a new issue. This has been going on for a long time. So I think we have to think about both sides. A lot of people that are looking to invest in their property, they're looking to do the most straight line, straightforward, easiest thing. That's actually what they come in and just ask us. What can I do without asking anyone, basically? So I think that needs to be, that's sort of the backside of the rules, is there are always avenues that people are looking for to how to get around what we're creating.
Devin thinks like me, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. That was the point I was going to make, was essentially it's happening anyway. Like, these conversions are occurring, people are putting basement apartments in already. If we create a system where it's easier for them to do it, then it'll happen. And this is not an issue here, it's an issue across Nova Scotia. These units are being built, people are getting sick, people are suffering because of those situations. If you allow for these buildings, and I'm going to address that in a second, to allow for more units to occur within them, then there's a bit of an incentive to actually reinvest in them to some degree. It doesn't ensure the rent necessarily, that's another tool, but provides a mechanism to actually try to improve them to some degree rather than slapping them in there, which is what we actually really, really want to avoid. The other thing too is when we're talking about limitations in terms of, 1 unit and 1 accessory unit, or 2 units or 3 units or 4 units, or whatever the version may be, I think there's also has to be this idea that what you're allowing doesn't mean that all the buildings are going to stay exactly the way they are. There's a number of homes that are going up right now that I'm well aware of that are the same size as 8 units that are in the city. And those are big apartments, but they're monster homes. They don't need to necessarily be that large, but the market is what it is, and people can buy what they want to buy, and they can do what they want to do. If you had 8 families living in there, not that much of a difference. So it's like in terms of mass and size and things. And again, you know, if you have a situation, like I'm looking at one of the images here where you have these really nice colorful row houses or salt box houses that we have in Halifax. They're relatively small, they're close together. There are 2 units in them. Most cases, you know, I did my whole undergrad living in a triplex, totally fine, very beautiful, nice environment, etc. So I think 3 is fine. I think 4 is probably fine. What's going to be really limited is the lot. So the lot configuration and what's next to it, and that's the important part. And that's the devil in the details that I think is important. Yeah, 2 cents, maybe 5 cents. I don't know. So.
That's fine. Kelly?
So I guess just kind of adding on to your point there about what might actually happen if we were to move forward with these options. I would just love to see like an impact analysis of if we did full 4 units as of right, how many lot are we actually talking about that would be able to build on that? And
Yeah, that's what's.
what?
Yeah, that's what scares
Right,
people. Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, and maybe we're talking, it would only be a really small amount. And then to me, I'm thinking, well, then it's not worth me doing it because people are so against it, right? It's like, we're just gonna make everyone angry and go out on a line here to get possibly an extra 3 units brought into town. Whereas it's like, that's not the low hanging fruit when we're looking at the big picture of adding more housing. So I think having a better understanding of what the possibilities are for outcome would help with this.
And I agree. And I think even the comparison between the 2 and the 4 would be interesting.
Yeah.
And Devin, I recall during one of the open houses, even in terms of the R1 going to R2, two dwellings within the unit or having an accessory, Devin had mentioned to me and some of the other people that were talking at the time that, you know, in reality, there isn't that many lots in R1 right now where you would be able to put, like, once you put the guidelines and say it in place, an actual accessory unit that your comment was that you felt the majority would end up being in the house proper, you know, and maybe an additional driveway or whatever. And I think that again is really good context when you come, if council passes this for those that are really concerned about it having a big impact in R1 and what R1 looks like. That, you know, if in fact it's not the majority of R1 lots that can accommodate an actual extra building, if everyone decided tomorrow we wanted to double up, right? So I think that's the impact analysis stuff, which I think is important for council to know.
Can we grab the last, because I'm gonna ask this question. It is 8:30 and we've said we would stick to 2 hours and we have not hit the new section, which is our affordable housing section at the end. So Devin.
I was just checking in the back about that same question.
Yeah, I was like,
We just think it probably deserves to be moved. Let's finish this. This is really important.
Yeah.
This is great.
yeah.
Yeah, this is
I know.
really good.
When you
So,
get 160
this is a
pages,
good problem
here's
to have.
what you're gonna get back. Yeah.
Uh,
so-
and I don't want
Okay.
to put Lindsay up here and be like, hey,
Yeah.
take 5 minutes because it's a topic.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to do it any disservice, so I don't
Okay.
think that's a fair thing to do. So, how many more do we have of this? Can we go 10 more minutes on finishing off the last of this topic? And then we'll, and we could tell our guests that came earlier that we were going to do it on a different day. Because I feel like they sat there for a long time and
That sounds
we
good.
didn't get to it.
Yeah, I
And,
guess they've gone.
They did,
Yeah,
so
there's-
I don't agree.
Neighborhood commercial, but I think we've already discussed that unless there's something that people are really dying to express, I believe that we could wrap up on.
I think the same for large lot infill. We would need to see what an impact on large. I could only think of maybe 3 that would even have a large lot that aren't already in Sterling Maple, like that are actually green space. I can have a couple. Yeah. Good with that for impact on both of those. Okay.
So there was strong support for the cottage housing. Why am I blanking here?
Cluster?
Cluster housing, thank you. Did anyone have comments on the styles for large lot housing? No concerns? Yeah, the cluster homes.
Especially when it's affordable.
Yeah, the design guidelines only.
Just depends on location. Yeah. Some of the large lots are on Main Street. Like in East and West Main Street, there's a few significant lots. Again, to the mayor's point, there's not 100 large lots. There's, you know, less than 20.
Unless we determine them.
We do have, under the existing bylaw, there is provisions to do garden housing, and there are some kind of guidelines about how to do that. Not terribly strong, but they're there now.
Maybe it's just to the point that if we're going to be like, here's all this opportunity to build whatever you want, maybe we need to have a closer look at what those guidelines are, how they relate to it.
And the mapping will help with that on where they are. Because if you're already in a design guideline space, so that's one thing already covered, but where's the others? Go ahead, Caroline.
I mean, people like cluster housing, but the reality is, I don't know how we make people choose it. So for example, on Maple, where they're building a 48 unit, 4-story building, that could have been cluster housing. So we haven't got something right there. If people want to live in cluster housing, we've done something not quite right.
Yeah, it was the most popular choice, yet no one built it.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
That doesn't make sense.
I was just thinking that in the context of the new, you know, of the East End development. I mean, I do remember that this cluster housing concept came up, and Lindsay and Devin will remember, there was a lot of, like, in the public engagement sessions, when people talked about housing styles within the new development, people really liked that. So to me, they wouldn't have changed that much in a year and a half since we engaged them on that they would like it again for large lots if we have them. Probably support.
I know your wife works down in Bridgewater, and I read the Blomina Naturalist article about the very unique housing project that took forever. It's kind of cluster, but people were passionate about it. I remember Bill Zimmerman so wanted something like that in Wolfville. That was built as co-op, as a community, kind of a lot of heart in it. And just there's so many impediments to doing it. And yes, as an ideal, it's wonderful, but the lack of support, yeah, the social aspect is huge, but the lack of support in terms of government programs kind of gets in the way, doesn't it? Guess I'm asking Alan.
They tried to do that in Port Williams. Do you remember that a few years ago too? And it never flew off the ground as well. So for whatever reasons, yeah.
Do you want me to talk about Bridgewater?
Oh.
We're in Wolfville. Yeah, it was a model. It was based on that was a lot of people that really wanted investment in that kind of lifestyle and communities. So you have to find those people. The costs were far overstretched in terms of what they actually expected, and they're nowhere near affordable. You're paying $500,000 for basically a 2-bedroom apartment. So, but it's energy efficient, but that not much more than what the building code would be at this stage. So it's like the building itself and construction is one thing. The model is something else. I think the model makes sense. How that one was necessarily done was a first timer. You got to do it about 5 times, I hear, before you get it right. So, yeah.
Maybe we can ask to be the 5th.
If you want, you got to do 4 more first. So, yeah.
Jen, did you have a
No,
comment?
no,
Oh,
no.
okay. Okay. All right.
Okay, anything else on residential areas.
I just want to, this is the thought that has struck me when I was looking through everything else. When we think about equity, equitable opportunity for people to live in a space that meets their needs. I just want to make sure by saying no to making any changes maybe to R1, that we are then forcing people who live in the other zones to experience more height, more density because of that.
Are we saying no?
No,
Yeah,
we're not.
Oh, so-
Nobody said no.
No.
I think Jody, you led off by saying if the house looks like one unit from the outside and you want an apartment, that's the feedback that I got from people to say, you know, the facade looks the same. And basically I would have conversations with people and I said, well, you had 3 children. Now there's 2 of you in there. So if you had an apartment, that's 1 extra person, you know, even in response to the sewer and water and everything like that. You can argue that 3 or 4 teenagers are using more water than maybe 1 person in the basement. So, you know, so you already would have had that number of people in the house. So people that talked to me liked the idea of having, you know, maybe in an apartment in the basement. So you're not really a landlord in the sense, maybe it's your family or something. And then you get to choose. Yeah, you get, well, yeah, we don't call it that anymore. So that's why we say accessory, you know, or whatever. But yeah, so that would be, so I don't think we've ruled out nothing in R1. But that was the most common one that I heard. Yeah. And I don't think the parking would be an issue.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I
What
think,
did 4 look like? I don't know.
yeah, I think you know, we made it clear, just because you're gonna zone it for that doesn't mean that people are gonna do it. I live in R2 and there's nobody around me that they're all single family homes, right? But we already can do this, right? And then I think I spoke to Devin and I don't have a definitive answer, but there's not a lot of R1 restricted in the province anymore. Am I correct, Devin? And if there are, where are they? And to Carolyn's point, I know people don't want to touch R1, but that one seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
That one does seem reasonable to me, given the way the province is going. But does anybody know where there's a R1 restricted?
I don't think there's many. Alan, do you know of any? He's a, okay.
Alan is a volunteer here.
So there's certainly places that, through having no interest in development and no push for change, they are R1. So these are single family subdivisions that have been built out. There's absolutely no growth, no one moving there. I think I shared with you, I've met with all the planning directors in the province. We're in a very unique position. A lot of my colleagues are planning for 0 growth, no one moving there, and completely different problems. And so I think in our sort of category
Challenges.
of places,
Not
challenges,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, in our category of community, I would say there are very few. And yeah.
So do you have enough feedback then to now meet next week and come back with some recommendations?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very thoughtful, very helpful. We appreciate your time.
Wonderful. I've kept everyone 10 minutes after, and I think the next one, I think we did a lot in that. But I think roundtable is next. Maybe everyone's talked out, so that's okay. Does anyone have anything jarring they'd like to bring up? Yeah.
I just have to say one thing, and I'm not sure exactly what I said, but when I was talking about affordable housing in the core area and height, I really think I meant non-market housing, and I'm not sure that I said that.
Yeah, you said affordable, and that's why I was like, yeah,
Okay,
I think I
thank you.
got you. Yeah. Perfect, thank you. So our next meeting is July the 10th. And we'll see everyone there. Motion to adjourn. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thanks. gonna turn the record.